Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Tuskegee Airman, born in 1921, finished Clark College in 1942, Howard University, master's degree in organic chemistry, 1943, went into the Army Air Corps, which was opened by Congress in 1941, 1942, where they spent $4 million to build a special airfield to train, quote, Negroes to fly airplanes for the Army Air Corps in 1941, 1942, 3. I graduated from Tuskegee Army Airfield in January 1944 and flew combat with the 332nd Fighter Group out of Italy, 1944, escorting bombers from Italy to Germany, Italy to Ploesti, so forth. With the 332nd Fighter Group, I was shot down on August the 12th, 1944, while strafing radar stations on the coast of southern France. I spent 9 months in Germany as a POW. Returned to the States in 1945, could not get a job, couldn't even wash test tubes for Park Davis with a master's degree in organic chemistry. Quote, overqualified. Became a school teacher in the city of Detroit and retired in 1980 as an assistant principal in Detroit, and stayed in the reserves all at different time. Retired from the reserves in 1969 as a lieutenant colonel, and still going around the schools, opportunity trying to talk about Tuskegee Airmen.
May I call you AJ?
Sure. Thanks, Bill.
I know you wanted to call AJ.
All right.
AJ, you said that they set up a separate
airfield.
Why? Why?
First of all, the Army's 1925 War College evaluation said that Negroes didn't have brains enough to fly an airplane. They were afraid of the dark. They had to be commanded by white soldiers, and said that the Army is not an instrument of social change. Therefore, Negroes were to expect that which was in ordinary society. Pressure was brought, the war had started, 1941. Pressure was on the Army to admit blacks to join the Army Air Corps to fly airplanes. Pressure from the NAACP, pressure from the Urban League, pressure from black newspapers and other organizations. And finally, Congress allotted $4 million to build Tuskegee Army Airfield, a special airfield to train Negroes to fly planes, because to get away from so-called integration, separate but equal, separate but very unequal.
Was there much of an airport or air station?
It was a fantastic place.
Was it?
It was 10 miles away from Tuskegee Institute. It was built in Tuskegee, in Alabama, because the other states refused to accept it. Illinois refused, Ohio refused, and only in Alabama, because the land was donated by Tuskegee Institute. This school, Tuskegee Institute, owned the land. That's where it was built, for training of us to fly combat with the 99th and the 332nd Fighter Group overseas. And all of us were trained at Tuskegee Army Airfield.
Go ahead.
Oh,
I was going to go ahead.
It started in 1941. The first class graduated in March of 42. There were 5 men in the first class. March of 42. One of the men was Benjamin Oliver Davis, Jr., who had gone through West Point. His father was a career officer,
Was he a black man?
Black man. His father was World War I. stayed in as a colonel. And Benjamin Oliver Davis Jr. out of Cleveland went through West Point, recommended by a senator from Chicago. Can't remember his name. Anyway, B.O. Davis, we call him B.O., Benjamin Oliver, finished West Point in 1936. While he was there, he was subjected to the silent treatment. Nobody spoke to him unless officially.
Was he the only black man in the
He was the first black to graduate from West Point in the 20th century.
Huh?
Silent treatment. When he came out in 1936, he applied for the Air Corps. But since there were no blacks flying in the Air Corps, there was no place for him to go. Then when Tuskegee Army Airfield opened up, he was in the first class. He was slated to be the commanding officer of the 99th Fighter Squadron, which was then authorized. And he was in the first class. Every month after that, there would be guys graduating. 42C, which is March, 42D, April, and so forth. I came out in January 44. See, I started 9 months earlier, in April 43. By that time, there were close to maybe 150 other men who had already graduated, forming the 99th Fighter Squadron.
Were you at Tuskegee after Selfridge?
No.
Or before?
I came to Selfridge after graduating as a second lieutenant. Then we came up to Selfridge to get our overseas training, flying P39s, getting training to go overseas to join the 332nd Fighter Group. The group, there were four squadrons had already been formed by then. And I was a replacement pilot for one of those squadrons. Good old Selfridge. Had a good time at Selfridge. Had a good time at Selfridge.
Tell me about it.
Well, P39 was great. I love that airplane. That was the one with the engine that sat behind you. And you got out on the runway to start. And if you could take off before the needle hit the red mark, before the engine would overheat and the ethylene glycol would spill out the sides, you're okay. But otherwise, you got on the brakes and tried to stop that son of a gun before you got to the end of the runway. But it was a great airplane, straight and level.
Where did you get into? Is it the Mustangs, the P-51s?
Got into the Mustangs after going over to Italy. They had Mustangs, the 332nd Fighter Group. That's when I got into Mustangs. That was a fantastic airplane. At the time, it was, as I explained to high school kids, it was the Porsche of the times. Smooth, beautiful handling, fantastic performance.
Did it have all the perks that the current jets have? We don't have an
At that time, it was the perks. Fill it up with fuel. Each tank had 92 gallons inside of each wing, 85-gallon tank sitting behind you, and underneath each wing, 110 gallons. You could fly for 6.5 hours, long-range escorting B-17s and B-24s.
I had heard that when you all started, when the Tuskegee people started, the other pilots in the 17s and B-24s didn't want any part of
True.
you guys.
Very true.
Then they couldn't have enough of you.
They finally found out that the red tails, our tails are painted red for air identification. The red tails stayed with them and protected them, and we have a record that the Army has been made to admit. The 332nd Fighter Group, the Red Tails, never lost a B-17 or a B-24 to German fighters. We stayed with them, top protection, and we guaranteed the guys came home. To start off with, I suspect many of the white bomber crews never knew that we were flying. When it became available, knowledgeable, that we were flying, some resented it, quite naturally, because let's face it, during World War II that racism was widespread. After they found out that we would bring them back home, bingo, they started asking for us.
Everything became colorblind.
Oh yes, you see. Colorblind, what's that? In the foxhole, there are no atheists.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's it, all part of it. That's all part of it.
When you were in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
how many missions did you fly?
I got 18 and 1/2. Our base was Ramatelli over on the heel. You know, Italy is like a boot.
Yeah.
And the heel up at the Adriatic, that's where our base was, a 1/4 mile from the Adriatic, right on that heel.
Uh-huh.
And I flew escorting B-17s, B-24s from Italy to Germany, Klagenfurt, Vienna Neustadt, Berlin, Ploesti. I went to Poland a couple of times, to Greece, but my 19th mission was where I was shut down, strafing radar stations on the coast of southern France. Our job was to go in and knock out these radar stations on the coast of southern France previous to the invasion. See, the invasion came off on the 15th of August, invasion of southern France.
Yes.
And the radar stations sitting on the coast would detect ships coming across the horizon. And I was in 301st Fighter Squadron, and our target, the 302nd had a different target, the 99th had a different target, and the 100th had a different target. See, there were 4 squadrons. And the 301st Squadron was right outside the city of Toulon. And as we went in strafing, I got hit going right across the top of the target. As I tell these kids today, and I relate this, I think I was at 50 feet. I don't know. All I know, I was treetop height because I got hits on the target, and as I went across the top of the target, these great big towers, some of them said, boom. I look up and there's a hole in the top of the canopy where the shell had come up through the floor. The fire came up out of the floor.
Went right through the air?
Right through the aircraft. And as the German officer explained later on, it was a proximity fuse that was supposed to explode at 300 feet. So you see, I was underneath it. I pulled up off the deck, and as you go up, you reach across up on the instrument panel, you pull a little red knob, the canopy goes off, and as you get up, I think I was 800 feet, I don't know. Whatever, I hit the old buckle because you had straps across here and straps here. When you hit the buckle, straps come loose, and then when I hit the buckle, turn the stick loose, the nose dipped, and I came out, and as the tail went by, I pulled the D-ring, and boom, chute open, and when she popped open, I'm going down through the trees. Number 1 and number 3 got through, and when they looked back, they saw my plane go in. They didn't see me get out. So when they got back to the squadron, they said, Jeff bought the farm.
Oh.
They thought I was killed. My parents got a KIA telegram.
Did they?
Killed in action.
When did they find out that you weren't killed?
2 months later, when the International Red Cross had got into the POW camp, and a letter went back, telegram, notifying them that I was a POW. And
when you were shot down, who picked you up?
I landed right in the middle of the guys who shot me down. The guy sitting in a seat with the 20 millimeters going off on each side of him. We see when the plane went up like this, hell, I came out, boom. And the plane went in about a mile over there, and boom.
Sitting right on his lap.
Sitting right in. Guys say, ach so, ja, Leutnant. I said, oh yeah, okay, got it. You got me. But a lot of kids have asked, well, Mr. Jefferson, weren't you scared? No. You're too busy doing what you had to do. I didn't get scared until 2 weeks later, after it was all over, sitting down somewhere in isolation. Then you go back and you think about what actually happened. Then I got the willies, scared myself to death. I almost got killed, you see. Very close, very close, very close.
How did they treat you once you were captured?
as an officer and a gentleman. Now the guys who first got me, they were astounded, they were startled. Here's this black man, this Negro, flying an airplane. There must have been somebody else. They were looking for the other guy, looking for the pilot. And when it became obvious that I was a pilot, they were astounded. But when I got to prison camp, the Germans on the way to POW camp, quite naturally they were astounded, just like a freak. Hey, look what we got, look what we got. When I got to prison camp, I found out that they knew more about me than I knew about myself, Bill.
How do you mean?
I was interrogated at Frankfurt, when I got to Frankfurt on the Main. A big book. Now, on the front of the book, it said, 332nd Fighter Group, Negroes, Red Tails. I looked at the book, and the guy had it on the table, and he opened it up, and he was thumbing through it, I saw all these pictures. Then I recognized the pictures were all the classes before me. See, every month a group of guys, and I knew all the guys, my upperclassmen. And finally he turned around and said, "Lieutenant, isn't that you? This is my class picture, my graduation picture."
Where'd they get all this information?
Because we find out somebody was back here. Well, first of all these pictures are published in newspapers, magazines, black magazines, and somebody was collecting them, sending it all back to Germany. Now, when I got back into Stalag Luft III, all the white officers explained they too had all their class pictures. Now, when I got to Stalag Luft III, Stalag is camp, Luft, air, Stalag Luft. It's a camp controlled by the Luftwaffe. 3, over near Sagan, Germany, Sagan, Poland, on the Oder River, 80 miles east of Berlin. When I got there, there were 5,000 Air Force officers who had been shot down over German-occupied territory. And when a B-17 went down, you had 4 officers: pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier. On some of those B-17 raids, you lost 60 B-17s. Enlisted personnel were kept in a different camp. Officers were at Stalag Luft III, and I think Stalag Luft I. Stalag Luft I was up on the Baltic. They were also officers. I was at 3. And the white personnel said pictures and material on them also was gathered. They were astounded by the background kept on them.
How long were you in prison camp?
I was there for 9 months, from August 44 to April 45. I was at Stalag Luft III for 5 months. August, September, October, November, December. Yeah, 5 months. And January, when the Russians started moving west to prevent us from being liberated by the Russians, the Germans put us out on the road and we walked 80 kilometers west. Then they put us on 14/8.
They didn't want you liberated by the Russians?
We didn't want to be liberated by the Russians either, because we'd heard about the Russians.
No.
They were vicious. Heck no. We heard about the Russians. And we finally wound up at Stalag 7A, Moosburg, near Moosburg, Germany, about 20 miles north of Dachau, near Munich. 20 miles north of Dachau. We were there until April, when Patton's Third Army came down and liberated our camp. That's when I saw Dachau.
You told me that Dachau, people around there,
A couple of days later,
never happened.
Today some people said Dachau never happened.
But what about the people right in the community?
They must have known. They must have known, but they protest too loudly.
Yeah.
We got a Jeep, and we hooked a ride. Somebody said, let's go find out this place where a lot of dead people. You could smell the place 2 miles away. because the ovens are still warm. The odor, the human flesh odor, was permeated 2 miles away. The people living nearby must have known. But the tables they had tables covered with hair, because before they burned the bodies, they cut the hair off. They used the hair for cushions. Tables covered with dentures, gold and amalgam. Before you burned the bodies, they had somebody there with pliers pulling out the dentures. And then there were so many dead bodies, they could not dig individual graves, so they dug a big trench and used bulldozers and pushed these bodies over into these, sprinkled lime in it and covered them up. Man's inhumanity to man. I saw Dachau. I never saw any of the other camps, only Dachau. That was enough. That was enough.
Believe it or not, Dachau was not the worst.
No, it wasn't the worst. What a horrible experience. But then when you tell kids today, and you relate this to high school children and even adults, they look at you real crazy, and it's to avert that Dachau never happened. The Holocaust was something that somebody dreamed up. But it still goes on today. Ethnic hatred. Talked to somebody the other day about Bosnia. The Muslims killing the Serbs. Look what happened even in Iraq.
Yeah.
The Sunnis killing the Shiites, or the Sunnis killing the Kurds, or Iran and Iraq fought for 8 years and used gas on each other.
It's not so much different than what the black man faced, is it?
It's the same old thing, over and over and over. The Irish, if you study your history, the Irish caught hell. Irish were brought over here for their labor. See? The same thing. The same thing. That's viciousness.
Sure.
Viciousness.
We were talking a little while ago about the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know in this area the reverence that's given to Rosa Parks.
Yes.
But there were many people before her that did lots of things. And I think you and I were chatting about Jackie Robinson. But nobody talks about it.
Nobody talks about it because it's much easier to talk about Rosa Parks, much easier rather than Jackie Robinson, or many of the other blacks who participated in their own particular way prior to World War II. Look at the man, escapes me, an officer, Army officer, who was killed in Florida after World War II, in uniform. Many of the other blacks who were persecuted, and a tremendous number of people who were hung after World War II, before Rosa Parks had the audacity to refuse her seat to a white man. We talk about the 761st Tank Battalion, who led Patton down through France.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
Here, these tank battalions, nobody ever talks and gives them any credit.
It's the first I heard about it is when you were talking about it today.
The 761st Tank Battalion, nobody talks about them. In a particular way, they were all part of this civil rights movement. Truman did not desegregate the armed forces only on the record of Tuskegee Airmen. He did it on the backs of the 761st, the 555, the Triple Nickel, the unit of the Black Parachute Division. Parachute. Airborne. He did it on the backs of the many, many blacks who were in artillery and port battalions and quartermaster. During the war, a lot of material had to be transported by support battalions. Blacks made up the quartermaster, the heavy, nasty, dirty work. Many, many, many. And on the record of these other blacks, and they found out many times there's something else. Truman and the War Department did not desegregate the armed forces because of the goodness of their heart. Don't get me wrong. They did it because of economics. They found out that it cost too much money to maintain the segregated section. And they desegregated it because it was economically, financially better to desegregate. Cost too much money to maintain these separate units. And I give him credit. It took a lot of guts.
A lot of guts.
A lot of guts to do so. See, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had the opportunity, but he didn't want to do it.
Didn't want to touch it.
Didn't want to touch it.
You told us a little bit about the Tuskegee people and 761, which was part of Patton's group.
Mm-hmm.
What did the 555 do?
They
were airborne?
They were airborne parachutists. They were destined to go to be paratroopers, like what's the famous paratroopers? The 101st?
101st.
Yeah. But in order, rather than send them to combat, they were sent to the West Coast, Seattle, Washington, up in Washington, to fight fires. They were parachuted and they fought the fires in Washington and Oregon. And famous, in terms of the Japanese were sending over these balloons,
yes,
paper balloons, that these are the guys who fought them. That's where the balance of their wartime experience was fighting fires in Washington and Oregon. Mm-hmm.
Japanese would have these balloons that they would set up and
send over to
the jet stream.
The jet stream, that's right, yeah, the jet stream.
With little bombs on them and everything. Yeah.
To start fires and what, ironically.
Yeah. Hard to believe that some of them actually landed.
Well, to take advantage of the jet stream.
Yeah.
We're finding out today the jet stream is causing all of our weather.
Yes. Huh.
Things that come in from the west and across the United States. Tornadoes and Tornado Alley. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When, after you were liberated, if you will, by the, was it Russians?
By the Patton's Third Army.
By Patton, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Patton's Third Army.
Where did you go after that?
Came back home and I was transferred back to Tuskegee Army Airfield.
Oh yeah? Because
there were still cadets coming through the program. And I was an instrument instructor in advance. And the last phase of training, you're taught instruments, and I was the instrument instructor until they closed Tuskegee Army Airfield.
Oh, it's closed now.
They closed it in 1946.
But there are still people who are joining the Tuskegee Air.
Up until the latter part of 46. Then they closed it. They closed the field down because the war was over.
But aren't there some young people who've been in the other wars who are still considered Tuskegee people?
Let me explain. We have young people coming in and joining the Tuskegee Airmen organization who were not active duty people. We don't want, as I said, we don't want to be like the dodo bird. The dodo bird died out because it had no chicks. We are bringing in young people to join the organization, no previous experience, to learn the experience, to history, and to be able to carry on the tradition of Tuskegee Airmen. We're all 80 plus. We're bringing in people who were Vietnam vets. People who were 35 and 40, young people. Our national president, we have chapters in 40 states, 40 cities, but 40 cities have chapters, anywhere from 75 to 100 people per chapter. Our national president is about 40 years old, a young man, Brian Smith, from Detroit, by the way, who is our national president over Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. And We're bringing in young people every day to learn the tradition, learn the history, and to carry on. To be able to go out and bring in more young people. To make sure, by the way, to make sure that our young people today excel in science, arts, aerospace, whatever. To make sure these young people are prepared to join the system. It's the best system in the world. We're talking about the United States of America. The best system in the world. Now, it ain't perfect. Now, don't get us wrong. We've been through segregation and discrimination. We've helped to break down barriers, but it's not broken completely. But it's better than anything else.
How do you go about recruiting new people? Do you recruit young people, like people right out of high school?
Wherever we speak and people have a desire to join the Tuskegee Airmen, we give them a card, say, here's the membership chairman. It costs $85. Pay your money, and here are some books, and here's some background. Mainly, pull up Google on your internet. And when Google comes in, print in Tuskegee Airmen and hit go. And everything about us, boom.
Right there.
And there are many, many books, by the way, published about Tuskegee Airmen. We've got a whole list of books. And people can learn. People can learn. There's much has been written about us.
Don't you find, though, that people are more stimulated by people like yourself coming, and then maybe from there on?
They love to hear.
You know, they hear something and then they'll go
admittedly,
do some reading.
They love to hear the so-called good old days where we were young and 22, 23, we were full of vinegar. Yes. And some of the experiences. You ought to hear some of these we've got some young men who in the National Guard out of Grand Rapids, the National Guard flying A-10s. You ought to hear them talk about some of their experiences of A-10s. You talk about, you think that we're the good old guys. Oh, these A-10s. Some of these young men.
Those were the training planes, weren't they?
No, A-10s are the Hog. This Hog that went over in Desert Storm.
Oh yeah.
The one with the two big jet engines on the back end. Some of these young men we've got a couple of young blacks who joined the 927th at Selfridge, or in the Guard, or flying F-16s. And to hear these young men talk about their experiences flying F-16s and the gizmos and pulling 6Gs, I said, oh my God, my body would be beaten battered flying 6Gs.
Do you remember what the horsepower was of your B-51?
Yeah, Mustang was 1,400, 1,470, something like that.
That was your horsepower?
Yeah, horsepower. 400 miles an hour max. But
not too much more than some of the cars today.
That's it. That's it. And the P-47 had 1,700 or 1,800 horsepower because that was that large radial engine.
Yes.
It was a monster. It was a monster. But it was exciting. Tell kids today. Yeah.
What did you do once you got out of service?
Became a school teacher. I came back in 1947 with a master's degree in organic chemistry. I couldn't even wash test tubes for Park Davis. Went to Summit Solvay, Park Davis, all the large organizations, quote, overqualified. Overqualified. So became a school teacher, elementary science school teacher. 35 years of teaching. Retired in 1980 as an assistant principal, elementary school in Detroit. All my stuff in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And ironically, overall, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
So what you mean?
School teacher.
Why?
Dealing with kids, being able to see the expression on a youngster's face when all of a sudden who would understand something, and the knowledge, and you see his eyes open as if to say, "Oh yeah, that's what you're talking about." Everywhere I go today, I see some, I call him young person, he's 45 at least. He said, "Hey, Mr. Jefferson." I said, "Oh my God, what school?" I've got many young people. I call them young people now.
They're young.
Yeah, they're 40, 45.
Sure.
They're still young. But Friday night, I was at Cornerstone Charter School in Detroit, and lo and behold, it was one of my former students. He walked up and he's got gray, salt, pepper hair, beard. He's about that big around. I wouldn't recognize him. And the first thing he says, "You wouldn't remember me because my name was William Winters." Bingo. Remember the little snot? I remember 12 years of age. Oh, he was a pistol. There, this young man now is Cub Scout leader, church, trustee, and I said, yeah, it's all part of. One of my former students is now the minister of a big church in Southfield, Carlisle Stewart, Hope United Methodist Church on Northwestern and Lasher. One of my former students. And I've got doctors who are former students. My financial advisor, my former student. My urologist is my former student. I just got through with prostate radiation. Doctor's my former student.
You sound like you take a bit of pride in the fact that so many of your students have done quite well.
Yes, and
you should.
Well, let me explain the other half. When the riots, the so-called riots, started, Detroit, 1963, 60, whatever it was, 3 of the young men who were killed by the police in the Algiers Motel were my former students. Very unsavory characters. These were under certain circumstances. I'm not going to argue whether they were right, wrong, or whatever. But they were my former students. See, I've had from the bad, the worst, and all in between. But that's all part of life, Bill. It's all part of life.
Yeah.
It's all part of life.
But on balance, I think you've done fairly well.
God is good. God is good.
So is AJ.
It's been good to me. I've survived. I hope I have helped a little bit in this life.
I'm sure you have.
I hope I've helped a little bit. I enjoyed today, by the way. I had a great time. Had a great time.
They had a great time.
With a Rotary.
Really.
Yes, indeed.
Really, it was spectacular.
Yeah.
They couldn't get rid of them. They were supposed to have left 15 minutes earlier.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming. Really, AJ, I tell you how much I appreciate, first of all, you coming and talking to our Rotary Club. But just as important is that I'm thankful for you participating in this Veterans History Project. And I'm sure you know the importance of that.
To make sure that we go down in history.
Yes.
Is it to say we were here.
And the thing is that this, we're all going to be passing along sometime, but some of it's got to be left over.
Somewhere we're going to leave our footprints.
Right.
Told a bunch of kids the other day, and they said, "Well, Mr. Jefferson, how old are you?" You don't tell them. I said, "Well, World War II is how many years?" And you see them sit there, and the kids look at, now these are 12 to 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And all of a sudden they come up with about 60 years. I said, I had to be a college graduate before that. How old are you when you finish college? They finally, after 2 or 3 minutes, they come out with about 22. Then, how old am I? And you see them sitting there with their fingers, they finally come up with about 82, 83. I said, yeah. If I'm lucky, God will give me another 5 or 10 years.
I want to just ask you one thing now, and that is, we kind of glossed over what you did before service. How did you get from birth to college? I mean, what were you doing? Were you...
We skipped it. Oh, first of all, my mother was a school teacher.
Education important.
Hell, I learned how to read before I went to kindergarten. And I was making good grades, but I was flunking high school until I had to take my father his lunch. My father was a laborer at Detroit Lubricator. Detroit Lubricator was on, oh God, Ferry Park and somewhere. And it was July, and I had to take him his lunch, and he was in there, stripped to his waist on the end of a ladle, another guy, pouring aluminum, making aluminum carburetors. Temperature was about 90 degrees outside, 120 inside, that foundry. That's when I said, God, if you let me get out of this damn place, I'll never go to a foundry again. I went back home, and I decided to make A's and B's in high school, chemistry, biology, math. And going to college was no question. I went to Clark College in Atlanta because it was a black college.
Yes.
And after 4 years of chemistry, biology, I majored in chemistry and biology. I minored in physics and math. And then I went to a year of chemistry, organic chemistry at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Then the war came along, and there was a draft. If I were drafted, I'd go to the quartermaster. Heavy, nasty, dirty work as a black. But this opportunity came to go to Tuskegee Army Airfield, go to pilot training.
Because you had graduated college.
Because I graduated from college. And if you're drafted, make $21 a month. Sleeping on the ground, heavy, dirty work. As a cadet, he made $75 a month.
Wow.
Learning how to fly a plane, which was fun, exciting. And then 9 months later, you become a second lieutenant. $150 a month, plus $75 for flying. With the wings, second lieutenant bars, and all the pretty girls.
Back in the 40s, that was big dough.
Oh, God. Gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. Eggs were 15 cents a dozen. Money, pretty girls. Oh, God. Bill, you talk about having a ball. Oh, I had a good time.
Good. Again, thank you for coming. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about, or.
I think we've covered it.
I think so.
I think we've covered it.
And again, I got to tell you how much I appreciate you being here. I know it's
been a
not
pleasure.
easy coming in such a
It's been a
cold
pleasure.
weather, coming all the way from Detroit.
Yeah, temperature is what? 4 degrees, 10 degrees
Well,
outside?
it was 2 this morning.
2 degrees, yeah.
But wind chill was -9.
Ah, that was a wind chill. That was good. Thanks much, old man.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I enjoyed.
Okay.
I enjoyed.
Could I do